Hello. Welcome back to Fallout 76. I've been looking at the raids in the PTS, and yes, there's some more changes coming beyond what we've seen so far. Once the update drops, it will be impossible to skip to the last boss, which means that you have to do the intermediate stages. Based on this and the changes we've had up to now, you can tell that the devs are trying to strongly encourage players, maybe even force players, to play the raids the way the devs intended. They want groups of players to run through all stages without using any glitches to make bosses easier. The latest attempt in the live game was to make the robot more docile if you were standing on the platform, but all that did was actually make the robot easier to solo for players that might not have optimized characters. So we have a recurring situation where the devs add limitations to encourage players towards a certain playstyle, but players immediately find a way around those limitations. Then the devs put more limits, and players find new workarounds. It's a vicious cycle. I know that this label might sound like an exaggeration, but there's good reasons why I'm saying that. When the raids first came out, people didn't know what they were doing, so they struggled. The raids were just a lot more difficult than what Fallout 76 had, even compared to Double Mutation Daily Ops, which were the most difficult content up to then. So the rewards were generous, almost excessively generous. We're talking about people dumping hundreds of stimpaks and rare materials after a raid. But it's also true that they were commensurate to how difficult it was to beat the raids. Even the first raid boss was a big challenge for those who didn't have the right gear. People were spending hours trying to get through, and the point is that back when the raids first came out, we needed those resources to make it through. I still have to spam stims when doing the last 2 sections of the raid, so it was good to have a load of free stims after every part of the raid. But I did say was. That's because the rewards have been changed. As people learned what it took to beat each raid boss, more and more tricks were shared throughout the community, and the result was that after getting the right gear, more and more groups were able to blitz through the raid. That broke the game's economy, because you had people with so many resources that pretty much nothing had value anymore. Take for example mutation serums. If you want to craft them, you first have to pay tens of thousands of caps to learn the plans from the Enclave vendor. Then you need stable flux to craft the serums. The intended way to get them is to launch a nuke, go to the nuke zone, and harvest radiated plants and stabilizing materials. The stabilizing materials are randomly found on enemies you kill inside the zone. So there was an element of luck involved, and you needed multiple different types of materials to stabilize a single flux. Crafting serums is pretty involved, but every raid boss just gives you some random serums. It completely devalued materials that were once rare. It was common for raiders to dump hundreds of stims and flux near the entrance to the raids, so even players that couldn't do raids were hitting the jackpot just by hanging around the entrance. So the devs adjusted the rewards, and now you're only getting about 18 stim per raid boss, a few random chems and some mutation serums, which is pretty poor if you think about it. The raids might be easy for those who know the tricks, but for those who don't, that's a positively miserly reward. The only unique rewards from raids are Vulcan armor sets and 4th star legendaries. And yes, I'm including the unique weapons in that. Aside from those, the rest of the rewards are barely worth the time to do a raid. Let's say you wanted legendaries, then you should be doing expeditions, because they give you more normal legendaries than the raids do. Let's say you were trying to farm for plasma or fusion cores, then again, you want to do expeditions, because you get 2 to 4 cores if you hold a Gatling plasma or laser when you finish an expedition. Raid bosses often don't give you any, and the most seems to be 2 cores. To be fair, the raids are better for farming normal ammo, but they're clearly inferior for cores. And considering how much ammo you might have to use against a raid boss, you might end up with less than you started with. You don't even get a lot of experience from raids. The first raid boss gives you around 8000 XP. An expedition by itself will give you around 16,000 XP. In a group of 4 players, you'll get around 40,000 experience. and 80,000 if you use 4 lunchboxes. Yes, an optimized player can get more XP per hour by repeatedly doing the first raid boss, but the point is that you get less experience per encounter, for what's supposed to be a more difficult activity. The only raid boss that gives you noticeably more is the last boss. So if you use the glitch to only do the last boss repeatedly, then it was more profitable than expeditions. But with the upcoming changes to stop people doing that, then you're better off doing multiple expeditions than doing a raid, if what you want is experience. You end up with the ironic situation where raids, which are meant to be very difficult endgame content, give you less rewards than other normal content. And the reason for that is that players have found ways to speedrun the raids, so the devs compensated by lowering the rewards. Otherwise, the rewards from the raids were breaking the game's economy. But it leaves us in the situation where the only reason to do raids is for the 4th star legendaries and the unique power armor set. And once you've learned the plans for those, there's no point doing raids anymore. They just become more dead content. I've talked about this syndrome in the past, but one of the reasons why players are so focused on speedrunning the raids is because their focus is on the rewards, not the journey. In that situation, players naturally want to get to those rewards as soon as possible. This cycle of players finding shortcuts and the devs patching those shortcuts is a predictable outcome. This is why we have the vicious cycle of the devs tweaking the raids and players continuously finding ways around those tweaks. We're not addressing the root cause. Players are doing this because the focus of many activities is on the rewards, not the journey to get to those rewards. I'm not trying to put the blame on the developers. It's a chicken and egg situation. There's a vocal section of the player base that's focused on min-maxing to the nth degree, and it's these players that the raids cater to the most. I'm noticing more and more of these players. But which one came first? Is it the case that the devs are simply making content that addresses a player demand? Or is it the case that the power gaming type of content is attracting more of these type of players to the game? To be honest, I don't have the information to say which one's right, but I have noticed changes in the way the game plays. Events are emptier. I've noticed that at the start of the season, you had events like Moonshine Jamboree failing because people were just not turning up to them. That's almost unimaginable. Moonshine Jamboree has always been one of the most popular events in my experience. Even raid groups at the start of the season were not filling up. Ironically, it's a bit better now, but it's still common to see nobody joining raid groups. It could be that the high-level players are more spread out because there's more low-level players in the game, maybe because of the Ghoul update. But I strongly suspect that the hardcore grinders have created groups to play with, and they were grinding raids in private servers to finish the season as soon as it started. Either way, what I would like to point out is that Fallout 76 is simply not a grinding type of game. Its strength is in being a chill casual player experience with a Fallout feel. If you don't believe me, then look at the Atom Store. Aside from the Fallout 1st subscription, the way the game makes money is by selling camp items and skins. Call me crazy, but I can't imagine that players focused on a power leveling experience would be spending hours and hours decorating their camps. Maybe they buy costumes, but I can't see that being too common either. These players are simply not the audience that Fallout 76 should be aiming to attract. Just because Fallout 76 is not that type of game. There's plenty of other games that do this power leveling game style better than Fallout 76 could, because they were designed from the ground up with power leveling in mind.
To the game. It is not an addition that is going to attract Destiny players and other raiders. I don't think it's hard. In fact, this raid is incredibly easy, but it's the hardest content in the game. It really...
The reason I'm pointing this out is because tweaking raids takes developer effort, and every hour spent on trying to restrict how players do raids is an hour not spent on improving the game. So let's say that hypothetically the devs do manage to force players to play raids in exactly the manner they want. Players that are fixated on the rewards will simply gravitate towards other activities that give them the biggest rewards. It could be back to nuking West Tech or doing expeditions, but it would be whatever gives you the biggest reward. If you increase the raid rewards to make them more enticing, then you run the risk of breaking the game's economy again. So you're limited in what you can do. So the net result will be that the developers have spent so many hours of their time on trying to control players, but the game as a whole has not improved. That developer time could be better spent on making new content. Let me acknowledge that something like raids can be enticing to management. Initially, it's an easy way to raise the player engagement stats, because any new activity will get attention, and if it's difficult, it will take time for players to learn how to do it. That means more players spending more time on those activities. So on the short term, grindy gameplay might make it look like players are more engaged, but that will be ignoring the long-term consequences. Because if you train a player base to only care about the rewards, then you have to continuously deal with players trying to shortcut the activity in order to get the rewards as soon as possible. In the long term, you end up spending more time trying to limit player behavior than you do on adding new content. And if you train players to focus on the rewards, then you have to continuously provide new rewards, otherwise they'll lose interest. The Oblivion remaster is a great example of what I'm talking about. One thing that constantly catches my eye is how often the Dark Brotherhood questline is mentioned. It's a perfect example of how the journey needs to be the focus rather than the prizes. Nobody talks about the prizes you get from that quest, but even after close to 20 years since its initial release, people still reminisce about the Dark Brotherhood quest and how good it was. Obviously, you can't do the exact same thing with an online multiplayer game like Fallout 76. It would be pointless to try and write a questline that mirrors what we find in a great single-player game. And I'm not claiming that I have the answer of how exactly that should be translated to Fallout 76. But it is possible to take the key principle of why the Dark Brotherhood questline is so fondly remembered and apply it to how events and activities are created for Fallout 76. And that's that the journey itself matters. Or in other words, the activity must be fun in itself. In many cases, this matters more than the prizes being offered. I'm not suggesting that the raids are trash or anything like that. What I am saying is that the actions of the player base suggest that they're focused on the rewards. Spending effort to force them to play a certain way is less productive than spending effort to make the journey more fun. I don't think I'd be wrong if I say that most of the players in Fallout 76 are those that want a chill, casual experience with a Fallout look and feel. But we're in a situation where the game might be changing to a more grindy, power leveling type of game. This new approach does have its audience. I've certainly seen plenty of comments in my videos, but it also runs the risk of leaving behind the bulk of the long-term players. And don't forget that those are the players that stayed around when Fallout 76 was being piled on after its not so great release. They are the game's most loyal players. It would be a mistake to take them for granted. What I'm saying is that I think that the game would be better served by focusing on those players.